Well, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has led to a big humanitarian crisis, a crisis that is challenging to deal with even with proper pre-planning. The exodus from the war-hit country has led to a major refugee crisis as well. How do situations like these impact the globe, especially the immediate neighborhood? How do nations deal with these kind of situations? To discuss this and much more, I'm being joined by Nayana Das, a social research professional from Geneva. Nayana has been working with the humanitarian and development sector for nearly a decade now. She is currently heading the Global Research Department for Impact Initiatives, a Swiss-based research organization that has operations in more than 25 cities across the globe. A warm welcome to you, Nayana. First of all, tell us something about the initiatives of impact with which you are currently involved.
Sure. Firstly, thank you for having me, and it's nice to speak to you. So yes, I work with Impact Initiatives, which is, we call ourselves a think and do tank, not a think tank. That's based in Geneva, Switzerland, but we're operating about 25 different countries, mostly in humanitarian and development settings. We have three kind of core initiatives, but all of our work is focusing on research and analysis, information management, and facilitating capacities of local and international aid actors. What our mission is, not to talk too much about like individual projects, but what our mission overall is that we want to kind of understand settlements through community dynamics, through socioeconomic relationships, through governance structures. And by doing that, hopefully promote knowledge, tools and best practices to inform policies in humanitarian settings. And by doing that, hopefully bring about positive impact on individuals and their communities. So that's really just a very, very big high level snapshot of what we do, but happy to answer any other questions.
Well, the world is now witnessing another massive crisis post the COVID pandemic. Yes, we are talking about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which has triggered another refugee crisis in Europe. Millions of Ukrainians have moved out. How do you look at the entire situation from the point of view of a social research professional? Is the crisis being addressed the way it should be, or what is your opinion?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's true that the world cannot catch a break from all these crises. For, of course, impact being based in Europe, this is a big focus right now. I think for social research professionals like us, whenever there's a new crisis, there are new information needs, right? There's a need to understand the populations and the geographies that are affected by the crisis. If you take Ukraine, for example, the emerging information needs would be which groups are most affected, where are they located, what are the displacement dynamics? You know, as you said, people are moving out, but there's also a lot of movement inside the country, right? If there's one area like being more at war, more in conflict, people are moving to another part of the country. So these are like really important things to understand. I think the work that we do at Impact or organizations like ours are doing is quite important because it's about kind of filling these information gaps and then bringing that information to decision makers to understand what is the new situation and how can you ensure that people that are most affected, most vulnerable are getting whatever help they can to survive, right? But there is a big challenge with that. I think, again, talking about research, in a conflict like Ukraine, where there is such limited access to the people you need to understand, to the areas you need to understand, you have to get creative. You can't collect data in the same traditional way, so you have to be a bit more innovative about how do you use information that's already available? How can you analyze that to understand the situation and then bring that information to people who can act on it? So it's definitely like a very, I guess, area where you can get creative, innovative, but also it's important that the information needs that are arising daily are like properly addressed so that at least humanitarian actors can act on it the way that's necessary.
So has Impact been directly a part of any project that has to do with the Ukraine crisis, the current Ukraine crisis?
Yeah, so we have two streams of work right now. We have an out of Ukraine response, which is concerning mostly the neighboring countries affected by arrivals of refugees. So that's currently we have teams in Moldova, Poland and Slovakia. I think also Romania being set up. Here we're really trying to kind of conduct a research and analysis about the population, about the refugee population, right? So people who have left Ukraine, arrived in these neighboring countries, and kind of understand what they're doing right now, but also a bit about their long-term plans as they evolve, as the crisis evolves. But we also are trying to, of course, produce information about inside Ukraine, but this is a bit more challenging because of what I mentioned of the access and inability to collect data. But what we're doing is more like analysis, so using maybe social media sources, spatial data, satellite imagery, any kind of information that's already out there to analyze the situation and produce information products. So that's our two streams of work for impact from the Ukraine response.
Right. Nayana, you have been engaged in assignments in places like Jordan, working with the Syrian refugee response, in Bangladesh, working on the Rohingya refugee response, and even in Afghanistan. Given your experience in working for teams setting up humanitarian response during such crises, can you tell us something on how host governments and humanitarian actors could better prepare for arrivals of large number of refugees from neighboring countries? Of course, in case of Ukraine, it was quite sudden, but still everyone knew that a war was brewing. So do you think countries can actually prepare for these kind of situations well in advance? And probably there should be some anticipation taken into account, say, the case of Ukraine.
Yes, absolutely. I think there is, unfortunately, we're in 2022. There's been a lot of kind of past experiences to learn from. Of course, every crisis is different. As you said, I worked in Jordan, which was as a refugee response, it was connected to the Syrian refugee crisis. And that's very different, right? Because in Ukraine, we're talking about the receiving countries, if you will, are kind of developed high income countries. In Jordan, not so much, right? In Syria, we were talking, most of the countries that were kind of hosting refugees were middle income, developing countries. So the response is a bit different, but I think you can definitely learn from other governments, other past experiences in order to prepare for a similar crisis. We did actually some work in Uganda a couple of years back. Yes, I think 2018. As impact, where a large part of it was the research about refugees in Kampala, in the capital city, that had arrived. I think at the time it was 100,000. But at the same time, a big part of the project was connecting the kind of municipal authorities of Kampala, of I think the capital city authority, to municipal authorities in Germany, in Strasbourg, so that they can learn a bit about how did Strasbourg at the time kind of respond as a municipality to the large numbers of refugees arriving in European cities. So I think that part is really important, the kind of learning from past experiences in order to prepare and set up effective collaboration systems between humanitarian actors and local governments. And of course, the second part that's important to prepare, I've already talked about it, it's just making sure you have the right information, a good piece of understanding of, what are the profiles of people that are arriving, what are their needs, how many, where are they coming from. And both during my time in Bangladesh and Jordan, of course, there was a big focus on this as well, because without the information, you can't really prepare or act in any way.
Now, humanitarian crisis is perhaps more real than ever in the world today, from Africa to Middle East to the subcontinents. Again, are governments proactive in putting plans in place to deal with future challenges, or we still are taking things as they come, and that's why the chaos in certain cases perhaps? Here we are talking about donor governments responding to such crisis.
Yeah, as far as I know, every kind of humanitarian actor, whether that's a donor government or an aid agency or even NGOs, they do have kind of planning mechanisms in place. Of course, each crisis is different, so how you respond, it's going to differ. But not to repeat myself too much, but I think, again, like this kind of promoting knowledge and learning, it's really, really important, because unfortunately, as you said, humanitarian crises are very real, but also humanitarian funds are very limited. So if there is a massive crisis in Ukraine, it also means diverting resources from maybe another humanitarian crisis, because there's only so much public funds going around. So I think just having that proper understanding, so that donor governments at least can take evidence-based decisions, how to prioritize and deliver aid and make sure people who need it the most get it, that's really, really important. So kind of just stressing again the knowledge and learning, but based on actual evidence is very, very important.
My last question to you, Nayana. How has been the experience during your stint in places like Jordan, Afghanistan, and even Bangladesh? Say, if we talk about a place like Afghanistan, it sounds quite challenging because of the obvious security situation. Not many would really want to work on ground in such places. How has been the experience overall?
Yes, I mean, I stayed in Jordan the longest. It was almost 3 years. That was a very interesting time, actually, because compared to Bangladesh, where I arrived a few weeks just after a large number of people had arrived from Myanmar, so it was very much an emergency phase at the time in Cox's Bazar. Jordan, I arrived a few years after, kind of maybe 2 years after the formal camps, formal structures had already been set up. So it's very interesting to see both sides almost, right? Like the immediate emergency and really setting up very basic things like water and sanitation facilities in refugee settlements, compared to Jordan, where it's more focused on, I guess, medium term, because refugees cannot go back to Syria just yet. So looking at access to livelihoods, access to basic services, relations with host communities in the country they're in. So it's challenging, but I think it's very intellectually challenging as well, which is I guess I chose this career for that. So it's very interesting. And Afghanistan, of course, it was a short visit, but it was very, very challenging because of the security situation. But then at the same time, it helps, for my line of work at least, it helps to actually kind of at least maybe meet some people who are in the crisis that you're trying to research, rather than sit in Geneva and try to research from here. So it's quite important to have that link with the countries we work in.
Well, Nayana, thank you so much for the conversation. A noble profession indeed. We wish you and your organization all the success. It's a noble work that you people are doing, and we wish you all the best in all your future endeavors. That's a wrap of Bottom Line this evening.